The restaurant shimmered with elegance, every detail meticulously designed to remind its patrons they were in the presence of wealth. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across velvet-draped tables, while the sound of a distant piano floated gently through the air. Laughter and murmurs filled the room, but in the corner booth, isolated from the noise, sat Alexander Hale. He was a man who commanded respect simply by existing. His presence was sharp, calculated, an aura built over decades of power, influence, and ruthless decisions. Tonight, he wasn't here to savor the delicacies of the city's most prestigious dining hall. He was here to work. In front of him lay neatly stacked documents, contracts worth billions, his sleek pen gliding across the pages with a steady hand. Signing his name was as natural as breathing. Every stroke of ink solidified his empire. When the last paper was sealed, Alexander leaned back, lifting a crystal glass of wine to his lips. He hardly noticed the young waitress approaching until her shadow fell over his table. "Your bill, sir," she said politely, sliding the folder toward him. Her tone was soft, but carried a subtle nervousness, the kind common among those who served men like him. Alexander gave a curt nod and returned to his paperwork, indifferent. But the waitress, Clara Bennett, did not walk away. Her eyes lingered on the documents spread across the table. And then, in an instant, her breath hitched. Her fingers trembled as she pointed at one of the pages. "Sir, that's my dad's signature." Alexander froze, his grip faltering. For a moment he wondered if he'd misheard her. But when he looked up, her eyes were wide, her face pale, her body shaking with certainty. The crystal glass slipped from his hand. It crashed against the marble floor, scattering shards that caught the golden light. The restaurant fell silent, conversations stalling as heads turned, but Alexander heard nothing. His pulse thundered. That name, that signature, it wasn't supposed to resurface. Not here, not now. The past he had buried was alive again, staring him in the face through the eyes of a waitress. Clara's heart pounded as the glass shattered on the marble floor, but she didn't back away. Her voice shook, yet she pressed forward, unable to let go of what she had seen. "That's my father's signature," she repeated, louder this time, as if daring the powerful man before her to deny it. Alexander Hale's eyes, once cold and unreadable, flickered with something rare: fear. For a man who thrived on control, the sudden shift was startling. He straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening. "What did you say?" His words cut through the air like steel. Clara swallowed, her hands twisting at her apron. "My father, David Bennett. That's his name. His handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. He disappeared when I was a girl. My family lost everything after that. His company collapsed overnight, and we were left with nothing but debts." Her voice cracked, and she blinked back the sting of tears. Alexander's breath caught. David Bennett, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in nearly 2 decades. Memories surged like ghosts breaking free from their graves. He remembered late nights in cramped offices, 2 young men chasing dreams bigger than themselves. David had been his partner, his mentor, his friend. Together, they had built the foundation of an empire. But then came the greed, the choices, the betrayal that had torn it all apart. Alexander's fingers curled against the table, nails digging into the polished wood. He had thought David was gone forever, lost to time and silence. Yet here stood his daughter, eyes burning with the same determination David once carried. Clara's voice trembled as she asked the question that pierced through his chest. Do you know what happened to him?" The mighty CEO couldn't speak. He lowered his gaze to the scattered shards of glass on the floor, his reflection broken across their edges. The weight of the past pressed against his chest, suffocating him. For the first time in years, Alexander Hale felt powerless, and Clara Bennett realized with a chill running down her spine that this man was hiding something about her father, something dark. Alexander Hale's penthouse stood like a fortress above the glittering city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the night, but the man inside saw none of it. He poured himself another glass of wine, though his hand trembled as he raised it. The sound of Clara's voice still echoed in his mind, slicing through his carefully built composure. "That's my dad's signature. It wasn't chance. It couldn't be." David Bennett's name, buried within contracts Alexander had signed just hours ago, wasn't a mistake. It was a ghost, clawing its way back from the grave. Alexander set the glass down, his eyes drifting to the safe across the room. He hesitated, then unlocked it with a code only he knew. Inside lay documents sealed away for decades, papers no one was supposed to see again. His fingers hovered over them, as though touching them might ignite the past. The memory returned unbidden. A rain-soaked night, the echo of David's voice raised in anger. "You promised me, Alex. We built this together. How could you sign it away without me?" He had seen the betrayal in his partner's eyes, the disbelief when he realized Alexander had gone behind his back. That was the night everything changed, the night David disappeared. Alexander pressed his hands against his temples, as though he could silence the voices. He had justified it for years. It was survival, he told himself. I did what had to be done. But staring at Clara's tear-filled eyes earlier that evening, he had seen more than suspicion. He had seen truth, and worse, her resemblance to her father was undeniable. If she kept digging, she would uncover everything. And if that happened, the empire he had built, the power, the respect, the billions, would crumble into dust. Clara Bennett didn't know it yet, but she had stumbled upon the single thread that could unravel Alexander Hale's entire life. And for the first time in decades, Alexander felt the one thing he had always despised: fear. Clara sat on the edge of her small apartment bed, the city lights flickering through the blinds. The folder she had stolen a glimpse of at the restaurant replayed in her mind over and over, the signature written in that familiar looping hand. She hadn't seen her father's writing in nearly 20 years, but there was no mistaking it. Her heart refused to believe it was coincidence. Her best friend, Maya, perched on the arm of a worn-out chair across from her, listening carefully as Clara spoke. "All my life I thought he left us, that he didn't care. But what if that wasn't true? What if someone else made him disappear?" Clara's voice cracked, and she twisted the thin silver ring on her finger, the only thing she had left of her father. Maya leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You're saying this billionaire Alexander Hale has your dad's signature on his files. Clara, that's not normal. That's a connection. Maybe a dangerous one." Clara nodded, her chest tight. "I can't just ignore it. I need to know what happened. My mother, she still cries some nights, you know? She thinks he abandoned us. But what if he didn't?" Doubt sank into her bones like ice. Why would her father's name, long erased from the business world, resurface in the empire of one of the most powerful men alive? That night, Clara made a decision. She began following Alexander Hale from a distance, trailing him after his meetings, noting who he spoke with, where he went. She searched public records, corporate archives, and old newspapers. With every discovery, the shadows grew darker. The more she dug, the more it felt as though her father had been deliberately erased, wiped clean from history. And Clara realized something chilling. If Alexander Hale was connected to her father's downfall, then exposing him might not just uncover the truth, it might also put her in danger. But it was a risk she was willing to take. Because the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could set her family free. The boardroom emptied in a slow procession of polished shoes and murmured goodbyes. Executives filed out with practiced smiles, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and expensive cologne. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Alexander Hale, flipping through notes, his expression as unreadable as stone. Clara lingered in the shadows of the hallway, her palms damp, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. She had rehearsed her words 100 times, but now, standing outside the lion's den, her breath faltered. Still, the fire inside her pushed her forward. She could no longer live with questions clawing at her soul. As the last executive left, Clara slipped inside. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound like a lock sealing her fate. Alexander looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. "This is a restricted space. Waitstaff aren't allowed here." Clara's voice wavered but didn't break. "You knew my father. Don't lie to me." The name hung in the air sharp as glass. Alexander's composure, His carefully crafted mask shifted. It was only for a second, but Clara caught it. The tightening of his jaw, the shadow in his gaze. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a calm that felt too deliberate. "You don't know what you're talking about." Clara stepped closer, fists clenched. "I've seen the papers. His signature is there. My father trusted someone, and then he vanished. And now I find you sitting on top of everything he lost? Tell me the truth." The silence stretched. For a moment, Alexander almost looked human, weary even. Then his voice cut through the stillness, low and heavy. Some doors should never be opened. The warning dripped with finality, but Clara's determination only grew. She saw fear buried beneath his words, and that fear told her everything she needed. He knew something. He was hiding something. Clara's eyes burned with resolve. "Then I'll open every door you've locked, even if it destroys you, or me." Alexander's face hardened, but his silence betrayed him more than words ever could. And in that silence, Clara swore she would uncover every secret he tried to bury. The city slept under a blanket of silver moonlight, but Clara's heart raced as she slipped past the towering glass doors of Hale Enterprises. She had no clearance, no right to be there, yet determination silenced her fear. With every step through the dim corridors, the echo of her shoes reminded her she was trespassing in the lion's den. Alexander's office was a fortress of power, polished wood, steel accents, and an air of absolute authority. She picked the lock with shaking hands, her breath catching when the latch finally clicked open. The room smelled faintly of leather and expensive cigars. It was silent, oppressive, as though the walls themselves guarded secrets. Her eyes darted to the far wall where a heavy cabinet loomed. She tugged at the drawers, most sealed tight, but one responded to the makeshift tool she carried. With a soft metallic snap, it slid open. Inside, papers lay stacked in meticulous order: contracts, acquisitions, mergers. At first glance, it was nothing unusual for a businessman of Hale's stature. But then she saw it. An envelope, yellowed with time, its edges frayed. Her hands trembled as she pulled it free and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was instantly familiar, looped, hurried, desperate. Her father's handwriting. Her chest tightened as she read. "Alex, don't do this. We built everything together. Please, I beg you, don't sign that deal without me. Don't turn your back on me. If you betray me, you'll destroy not just the company but my family too." Tears blurred Clara's vision. Each line cut deeper, tearing away the lies she had lived with since childhood. Her father hadn't abandoned them. He hadn't walked away. He had been ruined, betrayed, by the very man she had confronted days ago. Her knees nearly buckled under the weight of the revelation. She pressed the letter to her chest, sobs breaking free. Alexander Hale hadn't just stolen an empire. He had stolen her father's life, her family's future, and her childhood innocence. And now Clara knew the truth. The billionaire wasn't just powerful. He was guilty. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers, every corner alive with the hum of power. Politicians, investors, and tycoons mingled in tailored suits and sparkling gowns, their laughter ringing like polished music. For Alexander Hale, this gala was more than just a social event. It was an opportunity to showcase strength. His empire was thriving, and tonight, he would prove that nothing could shake him. But Clara Bennett had other plans. Dressed in a simple black dress borrowed from Maya, she looked out of place among the glittering elite, yet her eyes burned with determination. Clutched in her hand was the letter she had found in his office, the proof of betrayal that her father had written with his final hope. Her pulse thundered as she watched Alexander take the stage, commanding the crowd with his confident voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, raising his glass, "tonight is not only a celebration of success, but a reminder of how far we've come." Clara's voice cut through the air like a blade. "And how many lives you've destroyed to get here." The room froze. Heads turned. Gasps rippled through the hall as Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling yet strong. She held up the letter for all to see. "Tell them, Alexander. Tell them what you did to my father, David Bennett." The color drained from Alexander's face. For a fleeting moment, his mask slipped, guilt flickering in his eyes. But the billionaire in him refused to fall quietly. He laughed, sharp, dismissive. This is absurd. A desperate waitress spinning fairy tales for attention. Do you think anyone here will believe you? But Clara didn't back down. Her words rose above the whispers of the crowd. I have proof. He trusted you, and you betrayed him. My father lost everything because of you. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. The room buzzed with doubt, suspicion, and shock. Alexander tried to smile, but his voice cracked slightly. Don't let one girl's lies tarnish decades of success. Yet his eyes betrayed him, and in that flicker of guilt, Clara knew she had struck the first crack in his empire. The city's neon glow spilled across the glass walls of Alexander Hale's penthouse, but inside the air was heavy with silence. Clara stood rigid by the window, clutching her father's letter so tightly it wrinkled in her fist. Behind her, Alexander poured a drink with shaking hands, though the glass remained untouched on the counter. Finally he spoke, his voice low and weary. You want the truth? Fine, you deserve it. Clara turned slowly, her eyes blazing. Then say it. Tell me what you did to my father. Alexander exhaled a bitter laugh, though no humor touched his face. David was brilliant but naive. He trusted too easily. He trusted me. And his voice cracked. I betrayed him. I forged his signature. I signed the deal that cut him out. And in one stroke, I stole everything we had built together. Clara's chest heaved, tears welling. You ruined him. You ruined us. But Alexander wasn't finished. His hands gripped the counter until his knuckles turned white. You think that's the worst of it? He looked up, his eyes hollow. He didn't just vanish, Clara, he was silenced. The words struck her like ice. What do you mean? Alexander's gaze darted away, shame dragging his shoulders down. He came to me that night, demanding I fix it. We argued. He threatened to go public, to expose everything. And then, his voice faltered. There was an accident. Or maybe it wasn't. I don't even know anymore. All I know is he never walked away from that night. Clara staggered back, the letter slipping from her trembling hand. The world tilted, her breath shallow, her vision blurred by tears. Rage and grief tore through her chest like fire. You killed him. The words trembled out, a whisper sharper than any scream. Alexander's eyes glistened with unspoken regret. I destroyed him, he admitted, his voice breaking. And I've been destroying myself ever since. Clara collapsed into a chair, sobbing, hatred and heartbreak colliding until she could no longer tell which consumed her more. For the first time in years, Alexander Hale was stripped bare. Not a billionaire, not a titan, just a broken man haunted by the ghost of his betrayal. Clara sat at her kitchen table, papers spread out before her like fragments of a broken past. The letter she had found in Alexander's office lay beside another discovery, one she had stumbled across while digging deeper into old records. It was tucked inside a dusty box of her father's belongings, hidden in the attic of her childhood home. Her hands shook as she unfolded the yellowed page, recognizing her father's handwriting instantly. If you are reading this, Clara, then I have failed to protect you from the truth. I trusted Alexander like a son, and in some ways he was exactly that. Not by blood, or so I thought at first. But then came the confession. Your mother, she once loved another, and that man was Alexander's father. It means the man you know as Alexander is not just my partner in business, not just my betrayer. He is your blood. He is your half-brother. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The words blurred as hot tears welled in her eyes. Her father's betrayal by Alexander had been devastating enough, but this was something else entirely. The man who had stolen her father's legacy, who had driven her family into ruin, was the same man tied to her by blood. Her chest heaved as she dropped the letter onto the table. Rage and sorrow tangled inside her until she could hardly breathe. All her life she had dreamed of confronting the man who had destroyed her father. Now she knew that destroying Alexander would mean tearing down not only an empire, but also a piece of herself. Maya, who had come to sit with her, whispered in disbelief after reading the letter. Clara, this changes everything. He isn't just the man who betrayed your father. He's family. Clara pressed trembling hands to her face. Family. The word tasted bitter. She thought of her mother's tears, of her father's desperate pleas in his letter to Alexander. Betrayal wasn't just ink on contracts anymore. It ran in their bloodline. And when she finally faced Alexander again, it wouldn't just be as the daughter of a ruined man, it would be as his sister. The storm outside raged as Clara entered Alexander's penthouse one final time. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the vast room where the man who once seemed untouchable now sat hunched over his desk, shadows carving deep lines into his face. His empire was teetering, investors pulling away, the press circling like vultures. But Alexander hardly cared anymore. His downfall had already begun, long before the headlines. Clara approached slowly, the letter clutched in her hand. Her voice was steady, though her heart trembled. "I found the truth, Alexander. My father's final words." He lifted his eyes, weary and bloodshot. And for the first time she saw not a titan, not a billionaire, but a man drowning in the weight of his own sins. "Then you know," he whispered. Clara laid the letter on the desk between them. "You weren't just his betrayer. You were his family." "My family." The words broke him. His hands shook as he reached for the paper but stopped short, as though touching it would burn him alive. His face crumpled, grief spilling out in a raw, unguarded sob. He collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with trembling hands. For decades he had silenced the truth, but tonight it roared louder than any empire he had built. "I ruined him. I ruined you," he choked out, "and I can never undo it." Clara's tears slid silently down her cheeks, but her voice was calm, resolute. "I could expose you. I could watch your empire burn, but I won't." Alexander's head snapped up, disbelief in his eyes. "I'm not like you," she continued. "You destroyed my father to build your power. I will not destroy myself seeking revenge. I'm walking away, and you—" She pointed to the glass of wine trembling in his hand. "Will live with what you've done." She turned and left without looking back. When the door closed, Alexander sat in silence, staring at the glass until it slipped from his grip and shattered on the floor. Just as it had the night Clara first spoke her father's name. The empire stood tall around him, but Alexander Hale had never felt smaller, haunted forever by a single signature that exposed his soul.